It's finally coming to an end. The most shocking truth staring everyone in the face right now is that the internet, which once promised freedom, has become the most sophisticated cage ever built. And millions of regular people are quietly unlocking the door and walking out for good. Listen up, because this is not some fringe trend or temporary detox. It is a full blown silent revolution where folks are turning their backs on constant surveillance, instant gratification, and the whole modern tech machine that treats human beings like products to be tracked, sold, and controlled. I am talking about people walking away from the internet that started out fresh and exciting back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when it still felt like a wide open frontier full of wonder and real discovery, with no heavy handed government watching every click and no corporations building profiles on your every move to squeeze more money and influence out of you. Back then, the web had this raw, messy energy that made you feel alive. MySpace was quirky, and personal forums let real conversations breathe. And even early platforms gave you a genuine sense of ownership over what you created and shared without algorithms deciding what you saw or thought. Then the corporations rolled in with their boardrooms and profit models, and the government followed with its surveillance apparatus, and everything began to turn to shit in slow motion. Platforms that once felt open to regular people got locked down, centralized, and censored any voice that did not fit the approved narrative. What started as a place to blog, share ideas, and connect over common interests morphed into a heavily monitored battlefield of ideologies where algorithms, corporations, and special interest groups pull every string to keep you hooked, angry, and divided. The internet stopped being about real human exchange and turned into a machine designed to simulate life while slowly draining the real one out of you. Think about how ownership got completely destroyed in the process. Companies sold everyone on the convenience of streaming music, movies, games, and books, promising it was cheaper and easier than owning physical copies. At first, it seemed like a good deal until they had you locked in, and then they started the endless shitification, raising prices, fragmenting content across a dozen different subscriptions, and making sure you never actually owned a damn thing. Now, to watch your favorite shows or listen to your music, you juggle multiple monthly fees for services that can pull the rug out from under you anytime they want. People are waking up to this scam and they are walking away, choosing to own their media again instead of renting access to their own entertainment. The modern internet runs on lies built on top of more lies, surveillance disguised as convenience and control, dressed up as progress, and it is damaging real lives in ways that are becoming impossible to ignore. This is the sobering part. Friends, the whole system was engineered to keep you consuming, distracted, and dependent, while companies and governments collect more data on you than any secret police in history ever dreamed of. Everything from your location history to your private messages gets sucked up to build profiles that predict and manipulate your behavior. Apps like ride sharing and food delivery started as simple conveniences, but they quickly became tools of control once you traded your independence for ease. Prices keep climbing, subscriptions pile up, and now they push for age verification and biometrics that hand over even more personal information, making it easier to track, trace, and identify you at every step. You are not the customer in the setup, you're the product being harvested. And the wake up call is that more and more regular people have had enough and they are walking away from the entire mess. They are deleting social media accounts that pump them full of anxiety, stress, delusion, and mental exhaustion. Those platforms were supposed to connect people, but instead, they created a war zone of comparison, fake lives, and constant monitoring where strangers scroll through your profile like it is their job. The old days when social media felt social and messy are long gone, replaced by curated feeds designed to keep you scrolling for dopamine hits that leave you drained and dissatisfied. People are walking away from streaming services that own nothing but cost more every year, and they are rejecting a world where a smartphone is required just to function in basic society. They are tired of being conditioned to open an app for everything from ordering coffee to hailing a ride. When making it at home or handling things the old fashioned way saves money, preserves dignity, and keeps your data out of corporate hands. Instead, folks are returning to older technology that actually works without spying on them. They are digging up iPods, restoring them with fresh batteries and solid state drives, then loading them with their own curated music collections that play offline through wired headphones with no notifications, no low battery warnings, and no chance of the content being taken away. That music belongs to them completely, and it delivers a pure focused experience that smartphones can never match because the phone is always pulling you in a dozen different directions at once. The same thing is happening with video games, where people are going back to physical discs on older consoles that stay completely offline, so no company can revoke access or patch in surveillance. Others are building their own game libraries through emulation, owning the files outright and playing without any central server watching or limiting what they can do. This is not nostalgia. It is a deliberate choice to reclaim control over entertainment and free up mental space that constant connectivity had stolen. Beyond the gadgets, people are rediscovering self sufficiency in ways that feel grounding and real again. They are learning how to build things with their hands, how to create without needing an audience, and how to sit with boredom instead of reaching for the next quick hit of distraction. Short form videos that promise endless entertainment are getting called out for what they are attention destroying machines that wreck focus, drain energy, mess with sleep, and weaken memory over time. More folks are doing real dopamine detoxes, retraining their brains to handle slower, deeper experiences like reading actual physical books or having unfiltered conversations without a screen in between. This movement is about rejecting the centralized world of brain rot and taking responsibility for your own mind and time again. On the storage side, people are setting up their own network, attached storage devices, basically private servers that hold all their media files, movies, music, books, and documents right at home. Unlike cloud services that charge monthly fees and can shut you out or scan your data whenever they want, ANAS gives you full control, no recurring costs, and complete privacy because everything stays on hardware you own. You watch, listen, and read locally, blocking out the ad filled services that treat you like a captive audience. Ads are just another form of control, pushing products and ideas while collecting more data on what makes you tick. By moving to local storage, people cut out the middlemen who profit from turning your life into a constant sales funnel, and they avoid any service demanding biometrics, identity checks, or age verification that further erode personal freedom. And even artificial intelligence is getting pulled offline where enthusiasts run local models on their own machines instead of feeding endless subscriptions and data to big tech platforms. The centralized internet now feels like a rotting husk overrun by bots, algorithms, and manufactured content that controls what you see, think, and say. Speech and thought are deeply connected, so when platforms censor certain ideas, they are effectively training people not to think them either, which is a dangerous form of mind control wrapped in safety rhetoric. People see through it and they are turning away toward decentralized alternatives, including cryptocurrency cash bartering skills, trading, and even precious metals for real value exchange that cannot be frozen or tracked as easily by digital systems pushing identification everywhere. Many are moving into private networks. They control themselves or exploring spaces like the dark web, where traditional surveillance struggles to reach and freedom of speech still has room to breathe. Files can be shared without internet service providers. Logging every move, companies cannot shove marketing down your throat, and ideas flow without constant algorithmic interference. This is not about hiding from the world. It is about building pockets of genuine autonomy in a system that wants total visibility and obedience. The future taking shape mixes the best of old world reliability with smart new tools used intentionally rather than addictively. Physical media gives you something tangible to hold, while network attach storage scales that ownership into the digital realm without surrendering control. People are owning their music, their games, their movies, their books, and most importantly, their own data, refusing to let corporations trade it like a commodity behind their backs. This revolution is happening mostly in silence because the people involved are not seeking validation or clout. They are simply done with a techno focused world that promised connection, convenience, and progress, but delivered isolation, addiction, and control. They are stepping back into lives where attention is finite and protected, where experiences happen without needing to be filmed or posted, and where self sufficiency replaces dependence on apps that fail or change rules whenever it suits the owners. The modern world trained everyone to outsource basic tasks to technology, but now the bill is coming due in the form of higher costs, eroded privacy, and fractured attention spans that make real thinking and relating harder every year. Walking away is not giving up, it is waking up and choosing a path that puts human needs first again. Let me paint the picture a little more because this shift is bigger than just deleting an app or buying an old gadget. It starts with recognizing how the early internet felt like an extension of human curiosity and creativity. You could stumble across forums full of passionate hobbyists, share long form thoughts without character limits, or watch videos that people poured real effort into without worrying about trending sounds or engagement metrics. Discovery had a sense of adventure because it was not pre filtered through systems designed to keep you in an endless loop of similar content. Then the money men arrived and everything changed. Engagement became the only metric that mattered, which meant outrage worked better than nuanced short clips outperformed deep dives, and personal data became the fuel for ever more precise manipulation. What was once a tool for empowerment turned into a mechanism for harvesting attention and selling it to the highest bidder, while governments realized they could piggyback on the same infrastructure for monitoring and influence. The result is a generation raised on constant input that struggles with basic focus and real world problem solving. Studies and personal accounts pile up showing how heavy social media use correlates with higher rates of anxiety, depression, and distorted self image because the platforms are optimized to exploit insecurities and keep users coming back for validation that never fully arrives. Meanwhile, the convenience economy sold through apps has made basic skills atrophy. Why learn to cook or navigate a city when an app can do it faster? Until the app raises prices, glitches, or demands more personal information to keep working. The sobering reality is that every layer of convenience added another layer of dependence, and with it, another opportunity for control. Ride apps track your movements, food delivery knows your eating habits, and payment systems tie everything to identities that can be restricted with the flip of a switch. People are seeing the pattern and choosing to rebuild independence before it becomes impossible to remember how. Take the revival of physical media as one clear example of this pushback. Instead of cycling through subscription services that fragment your library and bombard you with ads, folks are collecting books on shelves, vinyl records or CDs, and movies on discs that cannot be remotely altered or deleted. An iPod restored with modern storage holds thousands of songs chosen by you, not by some algorithm trying to push new releases or sponsored content. Wired headphones deliver sound without the constant low battery anxiety or wireless pairing issues that modern earbuds bring, and the whole setup stays blissfully offline, so your music stays yours. Game consoles from earlier eras offer complete experiences on a single disc. No internet required, no updates that change the rules, and no risk of the title disappearing from your library because a company decided to delist it. Emulation takes this further, letting enthusiasts preserve and play thousands of titles across systems while owning the files outright on their own hardware. These choices are not about rejecting technology, they are about using it on your own terms instead of letting it use you. Self sufficiency goes deeper than gadgets, though. It is about retraining the mind to handle quiet and effort again. Short form content trains brains for constant novelty, which makes longer form thinking feel uncomfortable at first, but the payoff is regained. Attention span, better memory, and the ability to sit with an idea until it develops fully. Dopamine detoxes sound extreme until you experience the clarity that comes from breaking the cycle of quick hits that leave you restless and unfulfilled. Reading physical books forces deeper engagement because there is no swipe or like button to escape into when the material gets challenging. Building something with your hands, whether it is furniture code or a garden, teaches patience and real world feedback that apps cannot replicate. Dealing with boredom becomes a skill again instead of a problem to be solved with another scroll, and that shift opens up space for genuine creativity and reflection that the always online world had crowded out. The storage revolution, with network attached storage devices, represents a smart bridge between old reliability and new capability. You set up a dedicated box on your home network loaded with your entire media collection and access everything from any device in your house without cables or cloud dependency, no monthly fees, no terms of service that can change, no risk of a company scanning your files for advertising or compliance. It is your private cloud under your roof, and it scales as your needs grow while keeping everything under your control. People combine this with physical backups for the most important items, creating layered ownership that survives internet outages, corporate decisions, or policy changes. They block ad services entirely, choosing instead to support creators directly or simply enjoy what they already own without interruption. Biometric demands and identity checks get sidestepped because local setups do not require them. And the whole approach feels like taking back territory that had been surrendered piece by piece. Even the money side is shifting as people look for alternatives to fully digital centralized systems that grow more restrictive with each new regulation. Cryptocurrency offers one path for those comfortable with the technology, while others lean on cash bartering skills or tangible assets like gold and silver that hold value outside any single authority's control. Private networks and spaces less visible to mainstream surveillance become gathering points for ideas and files that do not fit the approved public narrative. The dark web gets mentioned not as a scary underworld, but as one example of the infrastructure that resists easy central control, allowing speech and exchange to continue where surface level networks have tightened the screws. None of this is about isolation. It is about creating breathing room in a world that wants every action logged, categorized, and monetized. This movement gains quiet momentum because it delivers tangible benefits that the hype around new tech never quite matched in practice. People report clearer heads, better sleep, more meaningful relationships, and a restored sense of agency when they stop letting devices and platforms dictate the rhythm of their days. They spend time outdoors or with friends without the urge to document everything for an invisible audience. They make things learn skills and solve problems using their own resources instead of defaulting to an app. The modern tech world sold itself as liberating, but it often delivered the opposite by making life feel smaller, more anxious, and more dependent. Walking away is the corrective step that lets individuals decide what technology serves them rather than the other way around. The early internet had flaws, but it still left room for serendipity and ownership. You built a profile that felt like yours. You shared what you wanted and you logged off when you were done. The corporation saw the potential for endless engagement and rewrote the rules, turning finite sessions into infinite scrolls, removing natural stopping points and replacing chronological feeds with systems optimized for addiction. Internal documents from major platforms have shown how they knowingly society, the economy, and financial institutions are all on the brink of collapse. Men are waking up and walking away. If you're done with the failing system, check out the Men Walking Away community. Connect with like minded men who are learning how to fully decentralize from modern tech, medicine, food, housing, finance, and society itself. Thrive while others struggle to survive. The link is in the description below. Go check it out now. Amplified content that harmed mental health, especially among young users, yet prioritize growth and revenue over fixes. Teen girls reported worsened body image anxiety and depression tied directly to platform use, yet the response was often more engagement bait rather than meaningful change. The pattern repeated across services as each chased the same metrics until the user experience became secondary to keeping eyes on screens and data flowing. Government interest compounded the problem as surveillance capabilities expanded alongside the commercial tracking. What began as targeted advertising evolved into broader monitoring that could be accessed or influenced by authorities under various pretexts. Age verification proposals, OS level controls, and biometric requirements, all marketed as protection or convenience, further entrench control while eroding anonymity and personal boundaries. The average person now carries a device that knows more about their habits than their closest friends, while society structures itself around the assumption that everyone has constant connectivity. This creates pressure to participate or be left out, but the hidden cost is the gradual surrender of autonomy. People are rejecting that bargain by simplifying their tech stack and rebuilding routines that do not require a smartphone for every basic function. Consider the food and mobility apps that seemed revolutionary at first. They removed friction from daily tasks, but they also centralized knowledge of your routines, preferences, and location. Prices rose as competition consolidated, and features like tipping or surge pricing added layers of cost that homemade or traditional options avoid. When those services demand identity verification or integrate with broader digital ID systems, the convenience starts to feel like a trade off with lasting consequences for privacy and freedom. The same logic applies to entertainment, where owning physical or locally stored media means no surprise price hikes, no content removal, and no ads interrupting the experience. And restored iPod or a shelf of books represents a small but meaningful declaration of independence in a world pushing subscription everything. Gaming offers another clear window into the shift. Older consoles with disc based games provide complete self contained experiences that cannot be patched, altered, or revoked after purchase. Emulation on personal computers lets enthusiasts preserve history and play titles across eras without relying on online stores or always online requirements. These setups stay offline by design, so there is no telemetry sending usage data back to companies and no risk of accounts being banned or libraries wiped. The joy of owning the game outright rather than licensing temporary access resonates with people tired of digital fragility. It pairs well with the broader move towards self sufficiency, where learning to repair devices, curate collections, or simply enjoy entertainment without external input becomes part of daily life again. Attention and mental space are perhaps the most precious resources being reclaimed. The brain adapts to the medium it consumes most, and constant short form content rewires it for distraction, making sustained focus feel unnatural. Dopamine detoxes involve deliberately reducing quick reward stimuli to let the nervous system recalibrate. Many report that after the initial discomfort comes a sharper mind, deeper enjoyment of simple activities, and the return of creative ideas that constant input had drowned out. Reading physical books encourages slower processing and better retention because the format demands presence in a way screens often undermine. Sitting with boredom teaches patience and self entertainment skills that the always stimulated world had made seem obsolete. These changes compound into a different quality of life where time feels more abundant because it is not being siphoned away by designed addiction loops. The network attached storage approach scales personal ownership intelligently. You invest once in hardware, then fill it with the media you value most. Movies, music documents, and photos stay accessible across your home network without depending on internet speed or third party uptime. Privacy remains intact because no external company holds the keys or scans the contents for patterns. Combined with physical media for irreplaceable items, it creates a resilient personal archive that survives policy changes, outages, or corporate decisions. Blocking ad laden services becomes straightforward when your entertainment lives locally, and the result is an experience free from manipulation and interruption. This intentional use of technology respects its power while refusing to let it dominate. Even artificial intelligence is finding offline expressions as people run smaller models locally on their own hardware. This avoids recurring fees, data sharing, and the influence of centralized platforms that shape outputs according to their own priorities. The broader internet landscape feels increasingly artificial with bots, algorithms, and generated content crowding out authentic voices. When speech is restricted, thought itself narrows because humans need expression to fully develop ideas. Recognizing that link helps explain why so many are seeking spaces with less oversight, whether private networks or less monitored corners of the web. The goal is not chaos, but room for unfiltered exchange and the ability to think and speak without constant fear of deplatforming or shadow suppression. Financial alternatives are part of the same logic. Centralized digital systems grow more tied to identity and compliance, making restrictions easier to impose. Cryptocurrency offers pseudonymous options for those technically inclined, while cash and barter keep transactions direct and tangible. Precious metals provide a store of value outside any single government's monetary policy. These tools are not perfect, but they represent choices that limit exposure to total system control. Private networks extend the principle by letting individuals or small groups manage their own communication and file sharing with reduced external visibility. The dark web serves as one extreme example where traditional oversight is harder to apply, allowing both legitimate privacy seeking and other activities, but the underlying desire for spaces beyond easy surveillance is widespread. This revolution mixes old and new in practical ways. Physical media offers durability and tangibility, while network attached storage adds convenient access without cloud dependency. Offline capable devices like restored iPods or dedicated game machines deliver focused experiences without the distractions built into modern multi-purpose gadgets. Self-sufficiency practices restore skills that convenience had eroded from cooking and repairing to managing time without external prompts. The common thread is intentionality deciding what technology enters your life and on what terms, rather than accepting the default path of ever increasing integration and dependence. The modern world pushed constant connectivity as progress, but many are discovering that selective disconnection brings clearer thinking, stronger relationships, and a deeper sense of ownership over their own existence. The early promise of the internet was real connection, discovery, and empowerment. What arrived instead was a sophisticated attention economy that learned to exploit human psychology for retention and revenue. Features like infinite scroll variable rewards and algorithmic feeds were borrowed from gambling techniques because they work to keep people engaged even when they consciously want to stop. Internal research at major companies revealed the harms, especially to younger users, yet business incentives won out over responsibility. The result is a society where average daily screen time climbs, while reports of anxiety, focus problems, and social isolation rise in tandem. People sense the disconnect between the promised benefits and the lived reality, and they are voting with their attention by stepping back. Government expansion into digital spaces added another layer of concern. Surveillance capabilities grew alongside commercial tracking, creating an environment where privacy feels like an outdated concept. Proposals for age verification, biometrics, and digital identification are framed as safety or convenience measures, but they expand the points of control and data collection. When basic participation in society requires a smartphone linked to verified identity, the pressure to conform increases. The quiet walkers away are refusing that trajectory, choosing instead to simplify reduced dependencies and protect spheres of life that remain under personal control. They are not disappearing from the world, they are reasserting boundaries that had been gradually erased. Entertainment ownership provides a concrete starting point for many. Collecting physical books, records, or discs creates a library that is yours to keep and pass on. Restored iPods loaded with personally chosen music offer distraction, free listening that modern streaming cannot match because there are no recommendations, no interruptions, and no risk of content vanishing. Older game consoles deliver complete experiences without online requirements, preserving the integrity of the original design. Emulation expands access while maintaining ownership of the files on local hardware. These practices feel empowering because they restore agency over how and when entertainment happens rather than fitting into corporate schedules and algorithms. Attention restoration follows naturally when the inputs change. Reducing short form content allows the brain to rebuild capacity for deeper engagement. Dopamine detoxes, while challenging, at first lead to greater appreciation for sustained activities like reading conversation or hands on projects. Boredom stops being an enemy and becomes a space where original thoughts can emerge. Physical books encourage immersive reading without the temptation of tabs or notifications. The cumulative effect is a mind that feels more capable and a day that feels longer because less time is lost to reflexive checking and scrolling. Local storage solutions like network attached storage make digital ownership practical at scale. A well set up NAS holds terabytes of media accessible from anywhere in the home network without subscriptions or external dependencies. Privacy stays high because the data never leaves your control and costs remain one time rather than recurring. Pairing this with selective physical media creates a hybrid system that is both convenient and resilient. Ad services get bypassed entirely when content lives locally, leading to cleaner, uninterrupted experiences. The approach treats technology as a tool under human direction rather than a constant demand on attention and data. Offline, artificial intelligence experiments show the same principle applied to emerging tech. Running models locally avoids feeding data to centralized services and eliminates subscription dependencies. It keeps the benefits of the technology while limiting the risks of influence and surveillance. The broader online environment increasingly feels populated by automated content and manipulated visibility, which pushes thoughtful individuals toward more controlled personal networks. Speech restrictions matter because they shape what can be thought and discussed freely. Seeking spaces with greater latitude, whether private or less monitored, is a rational response to tightening controls on mainstream platforms. Financial and exchange alternatives reduce reliance on systems that can restrict access based on compliance. Cash barter and tangible assets operate with fewer intermediaries and less visibility. Cryptocurrency provides additional options for those who value decentralization. These are practical tools for maintaining autonomy in an environment where digital payments and identities become more tightly linked. Private networks extend the idea into communication and sharing, allowing groups to operate with reduced external oversight. The underlying motivation is consistent across domains, preserving room for human choice and agency against systems designed for maximum visibility and control. The revolution unfolds without fanfare because its participants are focused on living rather than broadcasting the change. They simplify their tech use, rebuild practical skills, and protect their attention as a finite resource. The benefits accumulate quietly in clearer minds, stronger real world connections, and a restored sense of control. The modern tech push promised liberation through connectivity, but often delivered dependence, distraction, and data extraction. Choosing a different balance is not rejection of progress, it is a demand that progress actually serve human flourishing rather than corporate or governmental priorities. This is the wake up call, a straightforward recognition that the current path has costs that many are no longer willing to pay, and the quiet construction of alternatives that put people back in the driver's seat. The shocking truth that hits hardest is this: despite all the public complaints and outrage posts about wanting a simpler feed full of friends and family photos, the engagement numbers exploded when platforms pushed infinite algorithm driven video scrolls and people kept watching anyway, proving that revealed behavior shows a deep craving for the very distraction they claim to hate. That disconnect between what folks say they want and what they actually do with their time is one of the clearest signs that the modern internet has rewired human impulses in ways that leave many feeling robbed of their own agency and hours they can never get back. Friends, this quiet shift away from the constant online churn is gaining real traction because people are starting to notice how the whole setup drains them without delivering the connection or fulfillment it once promised, back when things felt more open and less engineered for maximum retention. Early social platforms had a raw, unpolished quality where you could share a casual thought or a bad photo without worrying about it needing to look like a professional production. Then the algorithms took over, prioritizing content that kept eyes glued, even if it meant pushing recycled arguments, emotional outbursts, or mindless loops of unrelated videos that somehow held attention longer than meaningful material. The result is an environment where scrolling feels like eating junk food. You know, it is not nourishing, yet the design makes it hard to stop. And the platforms profit from that exact weakness while users end up with less energy for real life pursuits. What stands out in all this is how the performative side of things has turned everyday experiences into staged events done more for the potential post than for the genuine enjoyment in the moment. People go out to dinner or attend gatherings, and instead of being fully present, they frame shots, edit clips, and think about captions, turning what should be simple shared time into content creation labor. This habit creates a layer of distance from actual living because part of the brain is always calculating how the experience will look to an invisible audience of followers and strangers. Over time, that calculation steals the raw, unfiltered joy from activities, leaving participants feeling like they performed rather than participated. Those who step back report an immediate lift in presence where conversations flow without interruption and moments land with more weight because they are not being filtered through a lens for later validation. Another layer that makes this movement feel necessary is the way platforms eroded genuine individualism by rewarding conformity to trending aesthetics and behaviors. Looks, outfits, even ways of speaking get copied at scale, so that feeds fill with near identical versions of the same style, whether it is makeup trends, fashion choices, or lifestyle poses. What begins as inspiration quickly becomes plagiarism, where original ideas get sidelined if they do not match the current viral template. This pressure to fit in online spills into offline life, making people second guess their own tastes or natural appearance because the dominant narrative says value comes from matching a narrow, expensive standard. The mental cost shows up in constant comparison that chips away at self worth and fuels dissatisfaction, even among those who appear successful by the metrics of likes and comments. The surveillance element adds a sobering weight too, because even without active posting, many users sense the quiet watching that happens in the background. Profiles get viewed by acquaintances who never interact, yet form judgments or harbor curiosities based on whatever fragments are visible. That knowledge creates an underlying tension where posting anything feels like stepping onto a stage with an audience that might include people from your past or present whose opinions carry unintended influence. Real relationships suffer when online personas clash with in person, reality leading to awkward encounters where preconceived notions from curated feeds color first impressions. Friends who once connected naturally now navigate expectations shaped by highlight reels rather than honest day to day existence, and that gap breeds disconnection rather than closeness. On the attention front, the damage runs deep because constant exposure to short, rapid fire content trains the mind to expect novelty every few seconds, which makes sustained focus on anything longer feel uncomfortable or even boring at first. News consumption follows the same pattern where daily headlines mimic video feeds offering emotional drama and outrage cycles that deliver little lasting insight but plenty of adrenaline. Major stories come and go with intense coverage, yet often resolve into minimal real world change, leaving consumers emotionally spent without gaining deeper understanding. Switching to weekly summaries or longer form reading restores a sense of proportion because it filters out the noise and lets facts settle without the pressure of staying constantly updated on every twist. The time freed up from that cycle opens space for activities that actually build skills or relationships instead of feeding a loop designed to keep users coming back for more stimulation. Physical ownership of media provides a practical anchor in this shift because it removes the fragility of digital licenses that can disappear with a terms update or regional restriction. Building a personal library of books on shelves or music on dedicated devices creates a collection that exists independently of internet access or corporate goodwill. Restored older gadgets like portable players with upgraded storage deliver focused listening sessions free from push notifications or algorithmic suggestions that pull attention elsewhere. The absence of wireless dependencies means no sudden interruptions from low battery alerts or pairing failures, allowing the experience to stay immersive and reliable. These choices reflect a broader desire to invest in tools that serve the user rather than extract ongoing fees or data in exchange for temporary access. Self sufficiency practices gain renewed appreciation when convenience layers get peeled back, revealing how many basic tasks had been outsourced to apps that introduce their own dependencies and costs. Cooking meals from scratch using simple ingredients costs less over time and builds knowledge that no delivery service can replace during outages or price spikes. Navigating without constant mapping assistance strengthens spatial awareness and confidence in real world environments while reducing the data trail left by location tracking features. Repairing items instead of replacing them when possible extends the life of possessions and teaches problem solving that carries over into other areas of life. These habits do not reject all technology, they simply prioritize methods that keep control closer to the individual and reduce reliance on systems that can change rules without warning. On the storage side, with personal network devices, offers a smart way to manage digital collections without handing responsibility to distant servers. Setting up such a system at home allows movies, music documents, and photos to stay accessible across personal devices while remaining fully under local control. No recurring subscription means costs stay predictable and data stays private without external scanning for advertising profiles or compliance checks. Backing up critical files to physical media adds another layer of resilience so that important memories or work remain safe, even if network conditions shift. This approach treats digital assets like physical property, where ownership brings both rights and responsibilities rather than temporary rental under someone else's terms. Artificial intelligence tools are finding their way into offline setups as well, where smaller models run directly on personal hardware, avoiding the need to send queries through centralized services that log and potentially influence responses. Local processing keeps sensitive tasks private and eliminates ongoing payment requirements for basic functionality. While the technology itself offers clear benefits, the centralized versions come with risks around data use and output shaping that many prefer to sidestep. Running things locally aligns with the larger pattern of using powerful tools on personal terms instead of accepting the defaults that prioritize platform interests over user autonomy. Financial tools outside fully tracked digital systems provide another avenue for maintaining flexibility because centralized accounts and payment methods increasingly tie into identity verification layers that expand monitoring capabilities. Cash transactions or direct exchanges of goods and services keep interaction simple and less visible to broad tracking networks. Tangible assets like metals serve as stores of value that exist independently of policy shifts or account restrictions. These options do not replace all modern finance. They simply add buffers that limit total dependence on any single infrastructure that could impose sudden changes or access limits. Private communication setups and less visible network spaces allow groups to share information and files with reduced external interference. Whether through self hosted servers or other decentralized methods, the goal is creating zones where conversation can unfold without constant algorithmic sorting or third party logging. This does not mean complete withdrawal from public discourse. It means preserving spaces where ideas can develop without immediate pressure to fit trending narratives or engagement metrics. The existence of such options highlights how the mainstream online environment has tightened in ways that push thoughtful participants toward alternatives that better respect open exchange. The cultural move toward calmer, more grounded content reflects a growing intolerance for the loud, chaotic style that dominated for years. Feeds filled with rapid reactions, dramatic framing, and recycled arguments leave many feeling overstimulated rather than informed or entertained. Voices that speak steadily with substance and clarity start to stand out because they respect the audience's limited bandwidth instead of demanding constant emotional investment. This shift rewards maturity over volume and depth over speed, creating room for discussions that build understanding rather than just generate clicks. People sense the difference and quietly adjust their habits to favor sources that leave them with more clarity than exhaustion. Relationships benefit when the online filter gets removed because interactions regain their natural rhythm without the background noise of curated images or status updates shaping expectations. Meeting someone without prior exposure to their feed allows genuine discovery based on real time conversation and shared presence rather than on assumptions formed from selective highlights. Existing connections deepen when time together focuses on the moment instead of documenting it for external approval. The pressure to maintain an appealing online image fades, allowing people to show up as they are without performing for likes or comments. That authenticity often strengthens bonds because it removes the gap between projected self and actual self that social platforms tend to widen. Mental space expands noticeably when the habit of constant input gets interrupted for longer periods. The brain adapts to lower stimulation levels and regains capacity for deeper concentration on single tasks, whether reading a full book, working on a project, or simply sitting with thoughts without reaching for a device. Initial discomfort from reduced novelty gives way to greater appreciation for slower paced activities that deliver lasting satisfaction rather than fleeting hits. Sleep improves for many as evening scrolling decreases and the mind has time to wind down without artificial light and rapid content keeping it alert. Memory and creative thinking show gains because attention is no longer fragmented across dozens of short inputs competing for focus. The early internet era, despite its imperfections, left more room for serendipitous discovery and personal expression without heavy handed curation. Forums allowed long form discussions that built knowledge over time rather than rewarding the quickest hot take. Personal sites and blogs reflected individual voices without needing to optimize for algorithmic visibility. That spirit of open exploration got overshadowed as growth priorities pushed platforms toward features that maximized time on site, even when it meant amplifying division or superficiality. Recognizing that trade off helps explain why so many are now deliberately scaling back to recapture some of the original promise while discarding the elements that turn the tool against its users. Government and corporate interests overlapping in digital spaces raise legitimate concerns about the direction of control because expanded tracking capabilities serve both commercial profiling and broader monitoring goals. Features sold as safety or convenience often expand the data points collected and the points where access can be restricted based on compliance. When everyday functions, from travel to payments to information access, route through verified digital identities, the potential for pressure increases. Those stepping away are not necessarily rejecting all structure, they are creating buffers that preserve personal discretion in areas where total visibility feels disproportionate to the benefits offered. Entertainment choices that emphasize ownership and offline capability restore a sense of permanence that streaming libraries lack. A physical disk or file stored locally cannot be delisted or altered remotely by a distant decision maker. Collections built over time become personal archives that reflect individual tastes rather than platform recommendations. Older gaming hardware with self contained titles offers complete experiences without requiring ongoing online checks or updates that can change gameplay or remove features. These setups prioritize reliability and user control, turning leisure time into something restorative rather than another arena for data extraction and engagement farming. The broader pattern emerging is one of intentional technology use, where each tool gets evaluated by whether it serves clear human purposes or primarily serves the system that provides it. Convenience still has its place, but only when the hidden costs in attention, privacy, or autonomy stay within acceptable bounds. Self built or restored systems often deliver better long term value because they avoid the planned obsolescence and recurring revenue models baked into many modern devices and services. This mindset treats technology as an extension of personal capability rather than a replacement for it, encouraging skills that maintain independence even when networks or services face disruptions. As more individuals make these adjustments, the cumulative effect creates pockets of life that operate on different rhythms, less tethered to the always on cycle. Days gain breathing room when notifications no longer dictate priorities and attention returns to chosen activities rather than suggested ones. Social circles stabilize around people who value presence over performance, reducing the subtle competition that online metrics can introduce even among friends. Creative output often increases because mental resources previously spent on maintaining an online self become available for actual making and doing. The changes unfold gradually, but they compound into a noticeably different quality of existence where technology supports rather than dominates daily experience. This movement draws strength from its understated nature because participants focus on living the benefits instead of broadcasting the process. They simplify their digital footprints, rebuild practical knowledge, and protect finite resources like focus and time from designs optimized to exploit them. The modern setup promised unprecedented freedom through connectivity, but delivered new forms of dependence and distraction that many now find too costly to sustain. Choosing a balanced approach is not a step backward. It is a recalibration that demands technology prove its worth on human terms rather than assuming constant integration equals progress. The quiet walkers are demonstrating that real advancement includes the wisdom to set boundaries where the defaults have overreached. The real gut punch comes when you realize the people running these platforms knew exactly what they were building because their own internal research laid it out plain as day, yet they pushed forward anyway because the money and power outweighed any concern for what it was doing to regular folks living their lives. Leaked documents from years back showed clear numbers on how the designs hit teenage girls, especially hard with body image issues and unwanted exposure. Yet the response was to keep tweaking the algorithms for more watch time rather than dial back the harm. That kind of calculated indifference reveals the core truth that once the system scaled up, the users stopped being people and became data points in a machine optimized for retention at any cost. The quiet revolution happening now is people refusing to stay in that machine by stepping back and forcing their own rules on how technology fits into their days instead of letting the defaults run the show. Take the way news consumption got twisted into another form of entertainment disguised as staying informed. What passes for daily updates often amounts to an endless emotional roller coaster of drama and outrage that delivers little actual understanding, but keeps the adrenaline pumping so you keep checking back. A single story might dominate feeds for days, with every minor twist blown up into major conflict. Yet looking back a week later, the lasting impact is usually minimal, while the mental energy spent feels completely wasted. Switching to longer, weekly roundups or printed summaries cuts through that noise because it gives perspective without the constant pull to react in real time. The time that frees up goes into actual living, whether that means picking up a skill, talking with someone face to face, or simply sitting without the background hum of alerts demanding attention. This is not about ignoring the world, it is about engaging it on terms that actually build knowledge rather than drain emotional reserves for no return. The shift shows up clearly in how relationships change once the online layer gets peeled away. When perceptions form, mainly through curated glimpses, the in person reality often clashes, creating awkwardness or disappointment because the highlight version never matched the full picture. Real curiosity fades when assumptions fill the gaps from what was seen in passing feeds, so conversations lose their natural flow. and questions that should happen organically get skipped. Friends who truly care start reaching out directly instead of relying on passive viewing, which reveals who was actually invested versus who was just observing from a distance. The peace that comes from knowing your daily moments belong to you and the people physically around you, rather than an audience of monitors, brings a lightness that constant visibility had stolen. Interactions regain their human rhythm where presence matters more than performance and energy goes into building memories instead of staging them for external approval. Individual style and personal taste take a hit under the pressure of trends that reward copying over creating something unique. What starts as casual inspiration quickly turns into widespread replication where looks, outfits, and even mannerisms converge into narrow templates that feel expensive and unattainable for most. The message sinks in that standing out costs money and constant effort, which feeds dissatisfaction because the baseline of simply being yourself no longer seems enough. Those walking away report a relief in letting go of that chase because they can dress, move, and express without calculating how it will land in a feed or match the current wave. Authenticity returns when the audience shrinks to the people who see you in real life and the focus shifts to comfort and genuine preference rather than validation metrics. This reclaiming of personal expression feels like shedding a weight that had been carried without realizing how heavy it had grown over time. The addiction mechanics built into the interfaces work like invisible slot machines, where every open delivers variable rewards that keep the brain chasing the next hit without conscious choice. Infinite scrolling removes natural stopping points, so sessions stretch far beyond the original intent, whether checking a single message or glancing at updates. The design borrows from proof and psychological triggers that exploit how humans respond to unpredictability, turning what should be quick tools into time thieves that leave users wondering where the hours went. Breaking that pattern requires deliberate friction, such as using basic browser access for essentials or removing the apps entirely, so the path of least resistance no longer leads straight into the loop. The clarity that follows shows how much mental bandwidth had been quietly siphoned off, leaving more room for deliberate choices about what deserves focus during the day. Self sufficiency comes back into focus when basic tasks stop routing through third party systems that introduce their own layers of cost and oversight. Preparing food from raw ingredients builds knowledge of flavors and nutrition that no delivery algorithm can replicate while keeping spending lower and data trails shorter. Moving through familiar spaces without constant digital guidance strengthens memory and confidence because the brain engages directly with the environment instead of outsourcing the work. Fixing small items around the house or learning simple maintenance extends the usefulness of what you already own, reducing the cycle of replace and upgrade that keeps wallets open and dependencies high. These practices do not demand perfection. They simply restore a baseline competence that convenience had eroded, making daily life feel more solid and less fragile when systems glitch or change their rules. Local media collections built on personal hardware create a library that answers only to the owner. Files stored at home stay available without depending on connection speeds or service availability, so movies, music, and documents remain ready whenever the mood strikes. The absence of embedded advertising or recommendation engines means the experience stays clean and focused on the content itself rather than pushing the next thing. Layering in physical copies for favorites adds durability because tangible items survive digital shifts or regional restrictions that can wipe access overnight. The satisfaction of owning the material outright rather than licensing temporary use mirrors the broader move toward taking responsibility for what enters your space and how it gets used. Running advanced tools like language models on your own equipment cuts the cord to centralized services that log every interaction and shape outputs according to distant priorities. Local setups keep sensitive work private and avoid recurring charges that add up over time while still delivering practical utility for tasks that benefit from the capability. The principle stays consistent across domains using powerful technology without surrendering control or feeding data into systems that profit from aggregation. This approach treats innovation as something to harness selectively rather than an all or nothing package that demands constant connection and compliance. Financial flexibility grows when options exist outside fully digital tracks that tie every transaction to verified identities and centralized ledgers. Direct exchanges of value, whether through tangible goods or straightforward cash, keep interactions simple and less exposed to broad monitoring or sudden restrictions. Assets that hold worth independently provide a buffer against policy changes that can alter access or terms without warning. Sound. These tools do not replace every modern convenience, they simply prevent total reliance on any single pathway that could limit choice or visibility when priorities shift at higher levels. Private setups for sharing and discussion let small groups maintain their own spaces where conversation develops without external sorting or logging at every step. The reduced visibility allows ideas to breathe and evolve before facing wider judgment, creating room for nuance that public feeds often punish in favor of quick reactions. This does not mean hiding from the world, it means protecting pockets of honest exchange where trust builds through direct participation rather than algorithmic amplification. The existence of such alternatives underscores how the main channels have narrowed in ways that favor certain voices and formats over open ended exploration. Calmer forms of expression start to resonate more as tolerance for loud, chaotic presentations wears thin. Content that races through reactions or piles on drama leaves audiences overstimulated without gaining much lasting insight, while steady, grounded voices offering clear explanations cut through with greater impact. The shift favors substance delivered at a human pace because it respects limited attention instead of treating it as something to exploit for maximum engagement. People gravitate towards sources that leave them steadier rather than drained because the cumulative effect of constant intensity takes a toll that becomes harder to ignore over months and years. The early days of online platforms carried a different energy where customization and chronological order let users shape their own experience with clear beginnings and ends to sessions. Profiles felt like personal spaces rather than optimized billboards, and feeds showed straightforward updates from chosen connections without hidden priorities steering the flow. That foundation allowed genuine catching up and sharing without the pressure to perform for invisible metrics or compete in endless trends. As growth became the overriding goal, the structures changed to favor retention through frictionless design and reward systems that amplified certain behaviors over others. Understanding that evolution helps explain the current pushback, where individuals rebuild boundaries to recapture some of the original utility while discarding the elements that turn the space against its users. Overlapping interests from large organizations and digital infrastructure raise practical questions about how visibility and access get managed because expanded data collection serves multiple purposes beyond simple advertising. Features framed as helpful or protective often increase the points where behavior can be observed or influenced, creating an environment where privacy feels increasingly optional. When routine activities route through layers of verification, the balance between convenience and autonomy tips in ways that feel disproportionate for many. Those choosing simpler stacks are not rejecting structure, They are inserting deliberate limits that keep certain spheres under personal oversight, where the benefits of integration no longer outweigh the steady erosion of discretion. Entertainment that emphasizes direct ownership restores permanence in a landscape where access can shift based on external decisions. Collections assembled over time reflect individual journeys rather than temporary catalogs shaped by licensing deals or regional rules. Hardware from earlier periods with self contained experiences delivers reliable play without requiring checks or updates that can alter the original intent. These choices prioritize longevity and control, turning leisure into something that accumulates value instead of depending on ongoing approval from distant providers. The larger pattern is one of measured evaluation, where each addition to daily routines gets weighed against its actual contribution to well being rather than assumed progress through more integration. Convenience retains its role when the trade offs stay transparent and bounded, but defaults that push endless connectivity get scrutinized for hidden demands on time and focus. Self managed systems often prove more resilient because they avoid built in cycles of obsolescence or revenue that keep users locked within upgrades and subscriptions. This perspective positions technology as an aid that should expand capability without diminishing the skills and independence that make life feel manageable on its own terms. As adjustments spread, the daily texture of life begins to reflect different priorities where attention returns to chosen pursuits instead of suggested ones. And social energy invests in direct presence rather than maintained images. Creative work gains from mental resources that once went into upkeep of online personas, allowing output to flow from genuine interest rather than external prompts. The changes happen incrementally, yet the overall quality shifts noticeably towards steadiness because the constant pull of designed loops no longer sets the rhythm. This recalibration insists that tools demonstrate clear value on human scales rather than assuming deeper embedding always equals advancement. The movement draws quiet strength from its focus on lived results rather than public declarations because the participants experience the difference in clearer heads, more reliable routines, and interactions that feel substantial rather than performative. They simplify where possible, rebuild competence in practical areas, and guard finite resources like focus from systems engineered to capture them. The modern configuration promised liberation through seamless connection, but frequently introduced dependencies that complicated rather than simplified existence. Selecting a deliberate balance represents a mature demand that any progress worth keeping must actually support flourishing, instead of prioritizing the growth metrics of the providers. One clear indicator of the deeper issue sits in the mismatch between stated desires and actual behavior when it comes to content preferences. Many claim they want straightforward updates from people they know, yet the data on time spent shows heavy engagement with rapid short clips and recommended loops that deliver novelty over substance. Platforms responded to that revealed pattern by doubling down on the formats that held attention longest, even when public feedback pushed back against the change. The result is an environment where the path of least resistance leads into consumption that feels unsatisfying afterward because it exploits impulses without nourishing deeper needs for connection or understanding. Recognizing that gap empowers the choice to introduce friction that aligns actions with stated values rather than letting defaults steer toward the more addictive option. The performative pressure extends into how ordinary moments get framed, turning simple activities into potential content opportunities that pull focus from the experience itself. Going somewhere or trying something new carries an undercurrent of calculation about how it might look later, which creates distance from full immersion. When that habit loosens, the moments regain their weight because they exist for their own sake rather than as material for later sharing. Energy that once went into capturing and editing redirects toward actual participation, and the memories formed feel richer because they belong fully to the people involved without dilution through an external lens. Comparison dynamics intensify when feeds constantly display polished versions of life that highlight peaks while hiding the ordinary stretches in between. The steady stream of apparent success or beauty sets an unrealistic baseline that chips away at contentment with one's own circumstances. Stepping back breaks that cycle, allowing appreciation for the actual texture of daily existence without the background noise of other people's highlights. Relationships especially benefit because they can develop based on shared reality rather than idealized projections that create pressure to measure up to unseen standards. The mental load from keeping up with rapid cycles of trends and discussions leaves less capacity for sustained thought or creative incubation. When input slows, the mind regains its natural cadence for processing and connecting ideas over time rather than reacting in fragments. Longer form material, whether reading or conversation, starts to feel engaging again because attention has space to settle without constant interruption from new stimuli. The restoration of that capacity opens doors to pursuits that require patience, such as learning instruments, tackling complex projects, or deepening knowledge in areas of genuine interest. Practical independence grows through small, consistent practices that reduce the need for external solutions to everyday needs. Handling basic repairs or preparations builds confidence that carries into other domains because the default response shifts from reaching for an app to assessing what can be done with available resources. This mindset treats challenges as opportunities to expand capability rather than inconveniences to outsource immediately. Over time, the accumulated skills create a buffer against disruptions, whether from service changes or broader instability, making daily life feel more secure on its own foundation. Local storage solutions scale personal archives in ways that keep control close at hand. Dedicated home systems hold large volumes of material accessible within the personal network without external dependencies for basic use. The setup allows selective access while maintaining privacy because the data never leaves the owned hardware. Combining this with tangible backups for key items creates redundancy that protects against loss from any single point of failure. The approach turns digital possessions into something durable and self managed rather than transient rentals subject to terms that can evolve without input. Offline capabilities in various tools extend the same logic by delivering functionality without constant data exchange or third party involvement. Whether for creative work, communication, or information processing, the local option keeps the benefits while limiting exposure to logging or influence from centralized providers. This selective use respects the power of the technology without accepting the full package of surveillance and subscription that often accompanies the cloud based versions. The principle remains using capability to enhance life on personal terms rather than conforming to the business models that prioritize retention and data flow. Alternatives in exchange and value storage provide pathways that operate with fewer intermediaries and less automatic visibility. Direct methods keep transactions straightforward and tied to mutual agreement rather than layered systems that add tracking at every step. Assets with intrinsic properties offer stability outside fluctuating policies or account based restrictions. These options serve as practical complements that maintain flexibility when primary channels introduce new requirements or limitations that feel overly intrusive for routine matters. Smaller scale networks for sharing and discussion preserve room for unhurried exchange where context can develop without immediate pressure for virality or alignment with dominant trends. The reduced external reach allows participants to explore ideas with trust built through consistent interaction rather than fleeting visibility. This setup complements broader discourse by providing spaces where depth can take root before facing wider evaluation. It reflects a reasonable response to environments that have grown quicker to sort and amplify certain patterns over others. Steady, thoughtful communication gains ground as audiences tire of formats that rely on intensity to hold attention. Material presented with clarity and measured pacing respects the listener by delivering insight without demanding constant emotional investment. The appeal lies in the way it leaves room for reflection rather than pushing for immediate reaction, which aligns better with how many people prefer to process information once the novelty of rapid fire content loses its grip. Voices that prioritize substance over spectacle start to stand out because they match the the desire for understanding that persists beneath the surface noise. The foundational period of online tools emphasize user agency through customizable spaces and straightforward timelines that supported natural rhythms of engagement. Sessions had clear purpose and conclusion because the structures did not actively fight against disengagement. That baseline allowed for connection without the overlay of engineered persistence that later became standard. As priorities shifted toward scale, the designs incorporated elements that favored longer stays through reduced friction and reward variability. The current adjustments by individuals represent a push to restore some of that original balance by reintroducing choice at the point of use. Concerns around concentrated control in digital layers arise because capabilities for observation and influence have expanded in tandem with commercial and institutional needs. Measures presented as protective or efficient often broaden the scope of what gets captured or conditioned, creating cumulative effects that feel unbalanced for everyday participation. When common functions integrate deeper verification, the trade off between ease and personal boundary becomes more pronounced. Simpler configurations serve as a practical counter by limiting exposure in areas where full integration adds more oversight than necessary value. Content ownership through direct means ensures continuity regardless of shifting availability or licensing landscapes. Personal selections accumulated over years form a reflection of evolving tastes that remain intact without external gatekeeping. Earlier hardware formats with contained experiences maintain their integrity because they do not rely on live connections or periodic approvals. These practices turn leisure into an asset that grows in personal significance rather than one that requires ongoing maintenance from providers. Evaluation of technology through the lens of net contribution to capability and freedom helps separate useful extensions from those that primarily serve external objectives. When defaults demand increasing integration, the scrutiny increases to ensure the actual return justifies the steady claims on attention and information. Approaches built and managed locally often demonstrate greater longevity because they escape cycles tied to revenue or planned replacement. This framework keeps tools in service of the user by requiring them to prove ongoing worth rather than assuming expansion equals improvement. The gradual spread of these choices reshapes daily patterns toward greater steadiness because priorities realign around direct engagement rather than mediated suggestion. Social investments focus on tangible presence, where feedback comes from real interaction instead of abstracted metrics. Creative efforts benefit from freed mental capacity that once supported maintenance of digital identities, allowing work to emerge from intrinsic motivation. The resulting texture of life carries a noticeable resilience because the rhythm no longer bends constantly to capture mechanisms outside personal control. This direction gains momentum from the tangible improvements people encounter when they adjust their relationship with technology. Clearer mental space, more dependable routines, and connections rooted in presence deliver a quality that the previous configuration struggled to match despite its promises of seamless access. The recalibration asserts that meaningful advancement must serve human scales of time, attention, and autonomy, rather than treating those as resources to optimize for other ends. The quiet participants show through their actions that boundaries can be redrawn in ways that restore balance without abandoning the genuine benefits that remain. The hard truth that keeps hitting harder every year is that even when millions of regular people publicly complained about the flood of short video recommendations and demanded a return to simple photos from friends, the actual usage numbers climbed us anyway because the design hooked them deeper than their own stated complaints could resist. Platforms watched the backlash roll in, with celebrities and everyday users calling out the changes, yet the data showed longer sessions and higher engagement. So the feature stayed and expanded because revealed behavior trumped expressed frustration every single time. That gap between what folks say they want and what they actually give their hours to exposes how the modern internet has learned to exploit human impulses better than most people understand their own habits. And the quiet walkers away are the ones finally closing that gap by force. Friends sitting here thinking about it over a cold one, you start to see how the whole system turned ordinary moments into stage performances where the real point became capturing the shot instead of living the experience fully in the moment. People head out for a meal or a gathering, and part of their mind stays busy framing angles, editing clips, and wondering about captions, turning what should be straightforward shared time into unpaid production work that drains the joy right out of it. When that constant calculation loosens up, the presence returns and conversations land with actual weight because nobody is half thinking about how the evening will look later to strangers scrolling at home. The relief feels immediate once the invisible audience shrinks because energy that once went into performing redirects straight into real participation, and the memories stick deeper without needing external proof to validate them. Individual expression took a real beating under the constant pressure of trends that spread at lightning speed and rewarded matching the current template over developing something personal. Styles, outfits, and even ways of carrying yourself converged into narrow, expensive looks that most people chased because standing apart started to feel like a risk rather than a strength. The message that kept repeating was that real value required constant effort and spending to hit the right aesthetic, which left many feeling like their natural baseline was never quite enough. Stepping back from that chase brings a noticeable lightness because choices about appearance and behavior can finally come from comfort and genuine preference instead of calculating appeal for a feed that never gets satisfied. Personal taste regains its footing when the comparison machine slows down and folks start showing up as they actually are without the background noise telling them to adjust. The way news got repackaged into another endless scroll disguised as staying informed added its own layer of exhaustion because daily headlines often delivered emotional spikes and minor twists that rarely changed the bigger picture, yet demanded constant checking to avoid feeling left behind. A single situation might cycle through multiple dramatic updates across different outlets, only to settle with minimal real consequence, while the mental toll of riding every wave accumulated into fatigue that served no useful purpose. Moving to weekly summaries or longer form sources cuts the noise without losing the essential facts because perspective replaces reactivity and the emotional drain eases off. Time that once disappeared into refreshing feeds redirects toward actual engagement with the world, whether through direct conversations, hands on projects, or simply allowing the mind to process without constant external input pulling it in different directions. Relationships regain their natural footing when the online filter stops shaping first impressions and ongoing expectations because perceptions formed through curated glimpses often create gaps that real life has to bridge awkwardly. When someone knows too much from passive viewing before ever sitting down together, the genuine discovery phase shortens and conversations lose some of their organic curiosity. Direct outreach becomes the main way people stay in touch once passive monitoring fades, which quickly reveals who was invested in the actual connection versus who was simply observing from afar. The ease that comes from knowing daily moments belong privately to those physically present rather than an extended audience brings a quiet confidence that constant visibility had quietly eroded over time. Interactions feel steadier because they build on shared reality instead of idealized fragments that set mismatched expectations from the start. The slot machine mechanics hidden in the interfaces keep sessions stretching far longer than intended because every refresh or swipe delivers unpredictable rewards that the brain chases without deliberate decision making. Removing easy access points, such as apps, and forcing deliberate browser use introduces just enough friction to break the automatic loop so that opening for one quick task does not automatically cascade into lost hours. The clarity that follows shows how much bandwidth had been leaking away unnoticed because the default path no longer leads straight into endless consumption. Intentional choices about when and why to engage start to replace reflexive habits, and the regained hours accumulate into space for pursuits that actually build rather than simply occupy time. Basic competence in everyday tasks returns when the habit of outsourcing simple needs to third party solutions gets interrupted because handling food preparation navigation or minor repairs directly strengthens practical knowledge that no algorithm can substitute during disruptions or cost increases. Assessing situations with available resources instead of immediately reaching for an app shifts the default mindset towards self reliance, and the confidence gained carries into other areas of life, making routines feel more robust overall. These small, consistent practices do not require abandoning useful tools. They simply prevent total dependence on systems that can alter terms or introduce new oversight without warning, keeping control closer to the individual where it belongs. Personal archives of media built and stored locally create collections that respond only to the owner without external interruptions or changing availability. Files held on dedicated home setups stay ready for use whenever wanted without relying on connection quality or service status, so the experience remains focused on the material itself rather than surrounding prompts or restrictions. Adding physical copies for especially valued items builds endurability that survives digital policy shifts or regional limitations that can remove access unexpectedly. The satisfaction of holding ownership outright rather than temporary permission mirrors the larger pattern of taking direct responsibility for what occupies personal space and how it gets experienced day to day. Advanced capabilities like language processing models running directly on personal hardware keep sensitive tasks contained and eliminate the need for ongoing data exchange or payment structures that often accompany centralized options. Local processing delivers practical utility while avoiding the logging and influence risks that come with routing everything through distant servers. The approach stays consistent, using powerful functions selectively without accepting the full bundle of dependencies that prioritize platform retention over user discretion. Innovation gets harnessed where it clearly serves without surrendering broader autonomy in the process. Value exchange methods that operate with minimal intermediaries maintain flexibility because they avoid automatic tying of every interaction to layered identity checks or centralized records that expand monitoring over time. Straightforward agreements, whether involving goods, services, or tangible holdings, keep matters direct and less exposed to sudden policy adjustments that can restrict access based on compliance factors. These pathways serve as useful complements rather than complete replacements, preserving choice when primary systems introduce requirements that feel disproportionate to routine needs. Smaller, controlled environments for exchange and discussion allow ideas to develop with context and trust built through consistent participation rather than fleeting algorithmic boosts. Reduced external reach gives room for nuance to emerge before facing broader evaluation, creating space that public channels sometimes discourage in favor of quick alignment or reaction. This setup supports honest exploration without demanding constant performance for visibility, and it reflects a measured response to spaces that have grown quicker to categorize and amplify certain patterns over open development. Steady, clear communication starts to draw more attention as tolerance for rapid, dramatic presentations fades because material delivered at a measured pace respects limited capacity by offering insight without requiring nonstop emotional involvement. The appeal comes from the way it leaves room for actual reflection instead of pushing immediate response, which better matches how many prefer to absorb information once the initial pull of fast paced formats loses its hold. Voices that emphasize substance over intensity stand out because they align with the underlying desire for understanding that persists even after the surface stimulation wears thin. Early online environments emphasized user shaped experiences through straightforward timelines and customizable spaces that supported natural start and stop points to sessions without fighting against disengagement. Profiles served as personal areas rather than constant billboards, and updates followed chosen connections without hidden steering mechanisms. That base allowed connection to happen on more organic terms before priorities around scale introduced elements that favored extended stays through reduced friction and variable rewards. Current individual adjustments work to restore some of that earlier balance by adding deliberate choice back at the point of use rather than accepting the evolved defaults. Questions around concentrated influence in digital layers persist because observation and shaping capabilities have grown alongside both commercial and institutional priorities. Measures presented as protective or efficient often widen the scope of captured behavior, creating cumulative effects that feel out of proportion for ordinary participation. When routine activities integrate deeper layers of verification, the balance between ease and personal limit becomes more noticeable. Simpler configurations act as practical counters by containing exposure where full integration adds oversight that exceeds the added value for many. Direct ownership of content ensures continuity no matter how licensing or availability landscapes shift because personal selections built over years form a record of individual interests that remains intact without outside intervention. Earlier formats with contained experiences maintain their original integrity since they do not depend on live links or periodic approvals from providers. These practices turn leisure time into something that holds personal value and grows in significance rather than depending on continued external permission to exist. Weighing each technological addition by its net contribution to actual capability and freedom helps distinguish genuine aids from those that mainly advance external objectives. When defaults push toward deeper embedding, the evaluation tightens to confirm that the real return justifies the ongoing demands on attention and personal information. Locally managed systems frequently show better staying power because they sidestep cycles driven by revenue needs or scheduled replacement, keeping the focus on service to the user rather than the other way around. The incremental spread of these adjustments gradually reshapes daily patterns so that attention stays with chosen activities instead of suggested flows, and social energy invests in tangible presence where responses come from real interaction. Creative efforts gain breathing room from mental resources that once supported upkeep of digital projections, allowing output to arise more from internal drive. The resulting daily texture carries greater steadiness because the overall rhythm no longer bends automatically to mechanisms designed outside personal direction. This path gathers strength from the concrete differences people notice once they adjust their engagement with technology, because clearer headspace, more dependable, daily structures and connections grounded in direct presence deliver a quality that earlier setups often fell short of, despite promising seamless everything. The adjustment insists that worthwhile advancement must respect human limits of time, focus, and independence rather than treating those as resources to maximize for separate goals. Quiet participants demonstrate through daily practice that boundaries can be redrawn, effectively restoring equilibrium without discarding the useful elements that still hold value. One telling sign of the underlying problem appears in the consistent mismatch between what people claim to prefer in theory and how they actually allocate their time when left to default behaviors. Many express a desire for straightforward personal updates, yet the measurable engagement leans heavily toward rapid novelty formats that provide quick variety over depth. Platforms observed that pattern and reinforce the elements that retained attention longest, even when vocal pushback suggested otherwise. The outcome is an environment where the easiest route leads into patterns that leave users feeling emptier afterward because the design targets impulses without addressing the need for meaningful exchange or insight. Closing that inconsistency by adding intentional friction helps align actual habits with deeper values instead of letting engineered paths dominate. The habit of framing regular activities as potential material for later sharing creates an undercurrent of detachment because part of the attention stays reserved for documentation rather than full immersion in the event. When that layer eases off, experiences regain their immediate substance since they exist primarily for the participants involved without serving as future content. Energy previously spent on capture and preparation redirects toward genuine involvement, and the resulting recollections carry more personal weight because they remain private to those who lived them. Steady comparison to polished glimpses of other lives intensifies when feeds present peaks without the full context of ordinary stretches, creating an unrealistic standard that quietly undermines satisfaction with one's own circumstances. Reducing exposure to that stream allows appreciation for the actual texture of daily reality without the constant background of external highlights setting the measure. Connections especially strengthen because they can grow from shared presence rather than pressure to match unseen benchmarks that often distort real interactions. The accumulated mental demand from tracking fast moving trends and discussions leaves reduced room for longer thought processes or the how quiet incubation that creativity requires. Slowing the input rate lets the mind return to its natural pace for linking ideas and developing understanding over time instead of jumping between fragments. Extended material, whether through reading or unhurried talk, regains its draw because focus has space to settle without fresh stimuli competing constantly. That restored capacity opens pathways to activities needing patience, such as mastering instruments, tackling involved projects, or building real expertise in chosen fields. Practical self reliance expands through repeated small actions that lessen dependence on external fixes for common needs. Dealing directly with minor maintenance or preparations shifts the response from automatic outsourcing to evaluating what can be handled with what is at hand. This orientation treats ordinary challenges as chances to grow competence rather than immediate inconveniences to pass off. Accumulated abilities create a buffer that makes routines more stable when external services face changes or interruptions, keeping life manageable from within. Dedicated local systems for holding media scale personal collections while keeping authority close. Home based setups store substantial amounts of material accessible within the personal environment without outside requirements for routine access. Privacy holds because the content remains on owned equipment and the arrangement allows controlled use without external prompts. Pairing with physical elements for priority items adds protection against single points of failure, turning digital holdings into durable, self directed resources. Direct operation of sophisticated functions on personal equipment extends the principle by providing capability without mandatory data sharing or subscription layers. Local options deliver the advantages while containing risks associated with centralized routing and influence. Selective application respects technological potential without committing to the complete set of accompanying dependencies that often favor platform priorities. The consistent thread is directing innovation toward enhancement of personal life rather than conforming routines to external business structures. Pathways for exchange that minimize layered tracking preserve room for straightforward interactions based on mutual understanding rather than automated oversight at every stage. Tangible or direct methods keep matters simple and limit automatic visibility to broader systems that can impose restrictions based on evolving rules. These serve as sensible additions, maintaining options when standard channels add conditions that exceed the needs of ordinary transactions. Controlled spaces for discussion and sharing allow context to build through ongoing participation, creating trust that does not rely on fleeting visibility boosts. Lower external reach provides latitude for ideas to take shape before wider scrutiny, offering room that faster public environments sometimes constrain in favor of immediate categorization. This arrangement supports genuine development alongside broader conversation by giving depth a place to form without constant pressure for alignment or speed. Clear measured delivery of ideas gains traction as audiences grow weary of formats relying on high intensity to maintain interest because paced material honors attention limits by providing value without nonstop demand for reaction. The strength lies in creating space for processing rather than insisting on instant engagement, which fits better with how understanding actually settles once rapid stimulation loses appeal. Expressions focused on content over spectacle become more noticeable because they meet the persistent need for substance beneath the surface level pull. Foundational online setups allowed for user directed experiences through simple timelines and flexible spaces that permitted natural session boundaries without resistance to stepping away. Personal areas felt like owned territory, and updates followed direct choices without unseen guidance shaping flow. That structure supported connection on more straightforward terms. Before scaling priorities, introduce features favoring prolonged interaction through smoother paths and unpredictable rewards. Present day personal recalibrations seek to recover aspects of that balance by restoring agency at the moment of engagement instead of accepting the later evolved structures as inevitable. Considerations about dense control within digital frameworks continue because capacities for monitoring and direction have expanded in parallel with varied interests from different large actors. Approaches framed as beneficial or secure frequently broaden what gets observed or conditioned, producing gradual effects that many find mismatched to routine involvement. When common actions incorporate additional verification steps, the equilibrium between convenience and self boundary grows more evident. Reduced configurations function as reasonable limits by containing reach where comprehensive integration brings more observation than proportional benefit. Ownership secured directly guarantees persistence, independent of fluctuating rules around access or permissions, because accumulations reflecting personal evolution stay intact without external decisions intervening. Contained formats from earlier periods keep their intended form since they operate without needing continuous external connections or approvals. Such methods transform discretionary time into holdings that accumulate personal meaning rather than requiring sustained outside validation to remain usable. Assessing technological elements according to their genuine addition to independence and effectiveness separates constructive extensions from those advancing separate agendas primarily. When standard paths encourage tighter weaving into daily structures, the review becomes stricter to verify that returns cover the steady draws on focus and information. Self-directed arrangements commonly exhibit superior durability by avoiding loops connected to revenue generation or scheduled turnover, maintaining emphasis on user benefit over provider metrics. The measured adoption of these practices slowly alters everyday flows so attention remains directed toward selected engagements rather than prompted sequences, and relational energy directs toward actual co presence where feedback arises from lived exchange. Inventive activities benefit from mental availability previously occupied with sustaining projected selves, permitting work to stem more from internal interest. The emerging character of days holds increased stability because governing tempo no longer defaults to external capture systems. This trajectory builds from the observable gains encountered when relationships with technology get realigned because enhanced mental availability, steadier structures, and bonds rooted in immediate presence provide substance that prior arrangements frequently missed despite claims of effortless linkage. The realignment requires that valuable development honor constraints of human duration, concentration, and self direction instead of viewing them as inputs for unrelated optimization. Those making the adjustments quietly illustrate that effective limits can restore proportion while retaining worthwhile aspects that continue to contribute positively. The raw fact staring down at everyone who bothers to look is that the same platforms hearing loud complaints about algorithm driven short videos and endless recommendations still saw their usage numbers surge dramatically because the actual time spent scrolling proved people were locked in despite the public gripes. When features like short form reels rolled out, users from big names to regular folks pushed back hard, saying they preferred simple photo feeds of real life. Yet engagement exploded anyway, with sessions stretching longer and retention climbing because the variable reward system worked exactly as engineered. That split between what people claim they prefer and what their daily behavior reveals shows how deeply the modern setup has trained impulses to chase novelty over substance. And the folks walking away are the ones finally acting on that awareness by cutting the cord and rebuilding their days without the machine setting the pace. Listen, this whole quiet revolution is not some trendy detox. It is people realizing the internet stopped being a tool for discovery and turned into a sophisticated distraction engine that steals hours while promising connection. And the evidence piles up in the way lives feel lighter once the constant input gets dialed way back. Early social platforms had this unpolished charm where you could drop a casual update or a bad angle photo without needing it to look like a magazine spread, and the interactions felt closer to real life because the pressure to perform had not yet taken over. Then the shift happened toward optimized feeds that prioritized keeping eyes glued through rapid clips and suggested content that pulled users into loops they never planned to enter. The result left many with fragmented attention and a nagging sense that time had been borrowed without permission, leaving less energy for the offline world that actually builds lasting satisfaction. What hits home is how the performativity crept into everything, turning ordinary days into potential content opportunities that pulled focus from the experience itself. Folks would head out for a simple activity, and part of their mind stayed occupied with angles lighting and how it might translate later instead of sinking fully into the moment with the people right there. When that layer drops away, the presence sharpens because the activity belongs completely to those involved without serving as material for an invisible crowd. Conversations flow with more depth, and the small details of life land with real weight instead of getting filtered through the lens of future sharing. The peace that settles in feels earned because energy, once scattered across documentation, redirects into genuine participation, and the memories formed carry personal substance that no feed could replicate. Individuality took a serious knock as trends accelerated and rewarded matching the dominant aesthetic over carving out something distinct. Outfits, hairstyles, and even postures started looking interchangeable across feeds because the incentive favored fitting the current wave that spread fast and carried social proof. The underlying pressure suggested that standing apart required extra effort or spending, while blending in offered easier validation, which left many questioning their natural preferences as if they were not enough on their own. Stepping outside that cycle brings noticeable relief because choices about appearance and expression can finally stem from internal comfort rather than external signals. Personal style regains its authenticity when the comparison engine slows and people show up in ways that feel true without the constant background calculation of appeal. News consumption morphed into another scroll based distraction, dressed up as awareness, because daily updates often cycled through emotional highs and minor developments that rarely altered the larger outcome yet created urgency to stay plugged in. A developing situation might dominate timelines with rapid twists presented as critical only for the dust to settle with limited lasting change, while the emotional ride left participants drained without deeper insight. Shifting to periodic summaries or longer format sources restores proportion because the essential information arrives without the reactive churn, and the mental space saved opens for actual reflection or direct engagement with life. The difference shows in steadier moods because the input no longer hijacks attention with manufactured urgency that serves retention more than understanding. Human connections regain their organic rhythm once the passive observation layer fades, because knowing too much from curated glimpses beforehand shortens the natural discovery process and sets mismatched expectations for real encounters. When preconceptions form through selective highlights, the in person dynamic can feel off balance as reality has to navigate assumptions built from incomplete pictures. Direct reaching out becomes the primary way ties stay alive, which quickly separates those invested in actual relationships from those content with distant monitoring. The comfort of keeping daily moments private to the immediate circle brings a quiet confidence that constant exposure had gradually worn down. Interactions strengthen because they build on shared presence rather than projected fragments that often distort the true picture. The interface designs function like hidden reward systems where each interaction delivers unpredictable outcomes that keep the brain engaged in pursuit without conscious planning. Introducing small barriers such as browser only access or deliberate removal of shortcuts disrupts the automatic flow so that a quick check no longer cascades into extended sessions. The regained control becomes evident as hours previously lost to reflexive loops return and intentional decisions replace habitual opening. That shift allows attention to direct toward chosen activities that deliver lasting value instead of fleeting stimulation engineered for maximum dwell time. Competence in routine matters reemerges when the default of handing simple needs to external services gets interrupted because managing food preparation movement or basic upkeep directly builds knowledge that strengthens resilience when systems face changes or delays. Evaluating situations with what is immediately available rather than defaulting to if an app cultivates a mindset of capability that extends beyond the task at hand, making overall life feel more grounded. These repeated actions do not eliminate helpful conveniences, they simply prevent complete handover of control to platforms that can adjust rules or add oversight without notice keeping autonomy closer to home. Locally held collections of media establish archives that answer solely to the owner with no external gatekeeping or availability fluctuations. Dedicated home based storage keeps material accessible on personal terms without dependence on network conditions or service policies, so engagement stays centered on the content rather than surrounding distractions. Supplementing with tangible versions for key pieces adds protection against sudden digital restrictions or regional blocks that can erase access overnight. The fulfillment of true possession rather than licensed use echoes the wider effort to claim responsibility for personal space and how experiences unfold within it. Sophisticated functions such as language or creative models operating on owned hardware contain sensitive processes and remove the necessity for continuous data transmission or payment models tied to centralized providers. Local execution supplies practical assistance while sidestepping the aggregation and shaping risks inherent in routing through remote systems. The method holds steady across applications, harnessing capability where it clearly benefits without committing to bundled dependencies that tilt priorities toward platform retention. Progress gets applied selectively to enhance daily existence rather than reshaping routines around external incentives. Exchange approaches with limited intermediaries sustain flexibility by avoiding automatic linkage of interactions to extensive verification or centralized tracking that grows more comprehensive over time. Straightforward arrangements involving goods, services, or physical holdings keep processes direct and less vulnerable to abrupt policy shifts that impose conditions based on compliance. These avenues function as effective supplements, preserving options when standard routes layer on requirements that feel excessive for everyday matters. Contained environments for sharing and conversation permit ideas to mature through sustained involvement, building confidence via repeated direct participation instead of transient visibility. Lower external exposure creates latitude for subtlety to surface before broader assessment offering territory that faster public arenas sometimes limit in favor of swift sorting. This framework complements wider dialogue by providing ground where thoroughness can develop without perpetual demand for alignment or pace. Measured, thoughtful presentation attracts growing interest as tolerance for high speed dramatic formats diminishes because paced material acknowledges finite attention by supplying value without insisting on nonstop reaction. Its power rests in allowing processing time rather than demanding immediate involvement, which corresponds better to how comprehension actually forms once fast stimulation fades. Expression centered on substance rather than spectacle become prominent because they address the enduring appetite for meaning beneath the immediate draw. Initial online structures supported user guided experiences via uncomplicated timelines and adaptable spaces that allowed natural session boundaries without opposing withdrawal. Personal territories functioned as own domains, and updates followed selected ties without concealed direction influencing order. That arrangement enabled linkage on simpler terms before expansion. Goals incorporated elements favoring prolonged presence through eased paths and inconsistent payoffs. Contemporary personal realignments aim to recapture portions of that equilibrium by reinserting agency during engagement rather than yielding to the subsequent structural changes as fixed. Issues concerning dense authority in digital structures endure since monitoring and guidance capacities have advanced alongside diverse priorities from substantial entities. Initiatives portrayed as safeguarding or streamlining frequently enlarge what undergoes observation or conditioning, generating progressive impacts that many regard as mismatched to standard involvement. When habitual actions incorporate further confirmation layers, the equilibrium between facility and self limit sharpens. Streamlined setups operate as sensible restraints by confining reach, where complete merging introduces observation exceeding proportional advantage. Secured direct possession of material assures endurance irrespective of altering regulations around availability or permission, since accumulations mirroring personal progression remain whole without outside rulings interfering. Enclosed formats from prior times preserve their design character because they function independently of and ongoing external linkages or endorsements, right? Such practices convert optional time into assets that gather personal significance rather than needing persistent external confirmation to stay operational. Judging technological components by their authentic addition to self direction and efficacy distinguishes constructive extensions from those chiefly progressing separate aims. When conventional routes urge closer integration into routines, the assessment intensifies to confirm returns offset the persistent claims on concentration and details. Independently directed systems regularly display enhanced endurance by evading loops linked to income generation or timed substitution, sustaining focus on user advantage over supplier indicators. The deliberate uptake of these habits progressively modifies everyday sequences so concentration remains aimed at selected involvements instead of prompted orders, and relational effort directs toward lived coexistence where responses emerge from actual exchange. Imaginative endeavors profit from mental availability formerly dedicated to sustaining projected images, permitting output to originate more from inner motivation. The developing quality of days maintains heightened equilibrium because governing tempo no longer defaults to external capture arrangements. This course accumulates from the evident improvements encountered when associations with technology undergo genuine adjustment because amplified mental availability, firmer daily frameworks and bonds anchored in immediate presence supply depth that former configurations often lacked despite assertions of effortless linkage. The adjustment demands that significant development respect boundaries of human span, focus, and independence instead of regarding them as inputs for unrelated maximization. Those enacting the changes unobtrusively demonstrate that functional limits can reinstate proportion while keeping beneficial facets that persist in contributing constructively. Another indicator of the core difficulty surfaces in the persistent divergence between declared inclinations and observable time allocation under default conditions. Numerous individuals voice preference for uncomplicated personal notices, yet measurable involvement tilts strongly toward swift variety formats, supplying quick diversity above profundity. Platforms noted that tendency and reinforced the aspects retaining attention longest, even amid audible opposition. The consequence is a setting where the simplest course guides into patterns, leaving participants feeling less fulfilled afterward, since the architecture targets instincts without fulfilling requirements for substantial linkage or comprehension. Bridging that divergence through added purposeful resistance assists in matching real conduct with profounder principles instead of permitting engineered routes to prevail. The custom of positioning routine events as prospective substance for subsequent dissemination generates a subtle detachment because portion of awareness reserves for recording instead of total absorption in the occurrence. When that stratum relaxes, experiences recover their direct essence since they exist chiefly for the involved parties without functioning as forthcoming material. Effort formerly allocated to capture and arrangement redirects toward authentic involvement, and the ensuing recollections bear greater individual gravity because they stay confined to those who experience them. Consistent juxtaposition against refined fragments of others' existences heightens when timelines exhibit summits without the complete background of routine intervals, establishing an implausible criterion that quietly undermines contentment with personal conditions. Diminishing contact with that stream permits esteem for the genuine fabric of daily existence without the perpetual backdrop of external summits establishing the gauge. Linkages particularly fortify because they can expand from mutual presence rather than compulsion to equal unseen criteria that frequently warp authentic exchanges. The gathered cognitive burden from pursuing swift evolving fashions and debates leaves diminished capacity for extended reasoning or the silent gestation that inventiveness necessitates. Decelerating the intake velocity permits the intellect to revert to its inherent tempo for associating concepts and cultivating comprehension across duration instead of leaping amid pieces. Prolonged substance, whether via perusal or leisurely dialogue, reclaims its attraction because concentration possesses room to settle absent fresh stimuli vying incessantly. That recovered aptitude unlocks avenues to endeavors requiring forbearance, such as acquiring instruments, confronting detailed undertakings, or constructing authentic proficiency in selected domains. Functional self dependence broadens via repeated modest deeds that decrease reliance on outside remedies for frequent necessities. Addressing minor upkeep or arrangements directly alters the reaction from instinctive delegation to appraising what can be managed with present means. This perspective handles commonplace difficulties as prospects to enlarge proficiency rather than instant annoyances to transfer. Gathered proficiencies forge a cushion that renders routines more steadfast when outside provisions encounter modifications or pauses, maintaining existence controllable from within. Specialized local arrangements for containing media enlarge personal accumulations while sustaining command nearby. Domestic based configurations stock considerable quantities of substance reachable inside the personal setting without exterior necessities for standard access. Confidentiality endures because the substance stays on possessed apparatus and the organization permits regulated employment absent outside cues. Merging with physical components for precedence pieces supplies defense against lone failure points, converting digital possessions into sturdy self steered assets. Straightforward functioning of complex operations on personal apparatus prolongs the rule by furnishing aptitude without compulsory information sharing or payment strata. Local selections supply the gains while enclosing hazards connected with centralized routing and sway. Discerning application esteems technological promise without pledging to the entire assortment of accompanying reliances that frequently favor platform objectives. The steady strand is steering advancement toward betterment of individual existence rather than conforming sequences to outside commercial frameworks. Routes for interchange that curtail layered following sustain room for candid interactions founded on reciprocal comprehension rather than automated supervision at each phase. Material or direct techniques maintain affairs uncomplicated and confine automatic perceptibility to wider systems that can enforce constraints based on developing regulations. These act as prudent supplements, sustaining selections when standard passages append stipulations that surpass the necessities of routine dealings. Regulated territories for dialogue and dissemination authorize setting to construct through enduring involvement, generating assurance that does not lean on transient perceptibility enhancements. Lesser outside reach furnishes scope for notions to assume form before more extensive review, presenting area that swifter communal venues occasionally restrict in preference of prompt arrangement. This structure bolsters authentic progression beside broader conversation by granting profundity a locale to shape absent perpetual compulsion for concordance or velocity. Lucid, deliberate conveyance of notions secures footing as audiences expand, fatigued of configurations, depending on elevated vigor to sustain curiosity, because pace substance concedes finite focus by furnishing worth absent nonstop appeal for reply. Its potency resides in generating room for assimilation rather than insisting on instant commitment, which corresponds superiorly to how grasp genuinely coalesces once swift stimulation recedes. Articulations concentrated on content above spectacle grow evident because they encounter the lasting hunger for significance beneath the surface level attraction. Foundational online arrangements permitted user steered involvements via straightforward timelines and flexible territories that sanctioned organic session confines. Absent opposition to retreat, personal domains operated as possessed realms, and notices pursued chosen bonds, absent veiled steering molding sequence. That organization facilitated linkage on planar terms before augmentation aims, assimilated components favoring extended presence through facilitated routes and erratic compensations. Present day individual readjustments seek to retrieve segments of that steadiness by reinstating discretion amid involvement instead of conceding to the consequent structural modifications as permanent. Deliberations about thick command inside digital scaffolds linger since surveillance and orientation abilities have progressed concurrently with assorted priorities from notable bodies. Endeavors depicted as defensive or optimizing regularly widen what experiences examination or conditioning, yielding accumulative outcomes that numerous view as ill matched to customary engagement. When habitual deeds integrate supplementary validation strata, the steadiness between convenience and self restraint clarifies. Simplified configurations serve as rational curbs by restricting extent where total fusion introduces examination, surpassing proportional gain. Assured straightforward holding of substance promises persistence, notwithstanding varying directives around accessibility or authorizations, since collections echoing personal advancement stay complete, absent exterior verdicts meddling. Confined formats from antecedent periods conserve their intended character because they operate autonomously of persistent external connections or sanctions. Such customs transform elective duration into belongings that amass individual import rather than necessitating enduring external ratification to remain functional. Appraising technological facets according to their sincere contribution to autonomy and productivity differentiates helpful augmentations from those mainly furthering distinct purposes. When routine avenues encourage nearer weaving into daily fabrics, the scrutiny heightens to ascertain returns, counterbalance the unrelenting assertions on attention and particulars. Self-steered organizations customarily exhibit superior persistence by circumventing circuits bound to earnings production or scheduled substitution, upholding emphasis on beneficiary gain over vendor markers. The intentional assimilation of these routines steadily transforms commonplace progressions, so focus persists targeted at picked engagements instead of cued sequences, and associative vigor directs toward experienced joint being, where replies surface from lived interchange. Resourceful labors gain from cognitive presence earlier committed to upholding projected likenesses, permitting yield to arise further from intrinsic incentive. The arising attribute of days upholds elevated constancy because overseeing cadence no longer defaults to external seizure organizations. This direction gathers from the observable enhancements met when relations with technology undertake sincere modification, because expanded cognitive presence, sturdier daily scaffolds, and ties fixed in prompt presence furnish profundity that preceding setups frequently missed despite declarations of effortless linkage. The modification necessitates that noteworthy growth honor confines of human interval concentration and self governance instead of perceiving them as inputs for unrelated augmentation. Those applying the modifications discreetly exemplify that operational bounds can reestablish equilibrium while retaining advantageous sides that endure in adding favorably. The sobering part that nobody wants to admit out loud is that even with all the noise about wanting authentic feeds full of real friends and family, the platforms watch their metrics climb higher every quarter because the infinite scroll and algorithm pushed random clips that people kept watching anyway, turning expressed frustration into revealed addiction that fed the machine while draining the users. Back in the early days, when things felt messier but more human, you could post a casual lunch or a mirror selfie without needing studio lighting or professional editing, and the interactions came from people you actually knew rather than strangers, adding for the sake of numbers. That raw energy got replaced by feeds that demanded polished drops and constant monitoring, where acquaintances treated profiles like a job clocking in to view without ever engaging, leaving a creepy layer of silent watching that made real life meetings feel off because everyone carried preconceived notions from curated glimpses. This quiet walk away gains momentum because folks are tired of living as if every moment needs documentation, turning simple outings into productions that steal the joy from being fully there with the people right in front of them. When the habit of framing shots and thinking about captions fades, the presence sharpens and conversations regain their natural depth without the mental split of performing for an audience that never truly cares the way a close friend does. The relief hits hard once that invisible pressure lifts because energy once scattered across planning content redirects into actual experiences, and the memories stick because they belong only to those who live them instead of dissolving into a feed that scrolls past in seconds. People report feeling lighter and more grounded when their days no longer revolve around capturing highlights that rarely reflect the full ordinary beauty of life. Individual uniqueness suffered badly as trends spread like wildfire, rewarding copies of the same lips, noses, eyebrows, outfits, and even postures, so that feeds started looking like mass produced versions of the same template rather than reflections of real personal taste. The message embedded deep was that your own way needed fixing or upgrading to match the viral standard, which cost time, money, and confidence, leaving many chasing an ideal that kept moving just out of reach. When people step back from that cycle, the freedom feels immediate because choices about how to look, move, and express come from inside rather than chasing validation from strangers who will never be satisfied. Authenticity returns in small but powerful ways, like wearing what feels comfortable without calculating its appeal, or speaking in your natural voice without editing for likability. And that shift rebuilds self worth that had been chipped away by constant comparison. And the way information gets delivered now often masquerades as staying aware, but really functions like another entertainment loop, delivering emotional spikes over actual understanding. Because daily updates focus on drama and minor twists that rarely shift the bigger outcome, yet create the urge to check constantly to avoid feeling out of the loop. A single situation might generate waves of coverage with every angle amplified, only for the reality weeks later to show little changed, while the mental cost of riding those waves adds up to exhaustion without building real knowledge. Turning instead to periodic deeper sources or printed roundups restores balance because facts land with context rather than urgency. And the saved attention opens room for thinking that actually matters or connecting with the world in direct ways. The difference shows in calmer minds because the input stops hijacking emotions for engagement and starts serving the person rather than the other way around. Connections between people heal when the passive viewing stops shaping expectations because seeing too many polished fragments beforehand shortens genuine discovery and sets up awkward gaps when reality does not match the online version. When assumptions build from selective posts, the in person dynamic carries extra weight as people navigate images that may not align with the full human sitting across from them. Reaching out directly becomes the real test of interest, which separates those who value actual presence from those content with distant observation. And the bonds that form feel stronger because they grow from shared time rather than projected ideals. The comfort of keeping everyday moments private to the immediate circle brings a sense of safety that constant exposure had slowly eroded, making interactions feel less like performances and more like life. The designs of these platforms work on the brain like unpredictable reward systems where each tap or swipe offers the chance of something engaging that keeps the session going far beyond the original plan without the user consciously choosing to stay. Adding small, deliberate barriers, such as sticking to browser access for essentials or removing the easy one tap entry, disrupts that automatic pull so a quick glance does not turn into lost time. The control that returns becomes obvious as previously wasted hours come back and decisions about when to engage become intentional instead of reflexive. That change lets attention flow toward activities that build skills, relationships, or simple satisfaction, rather than filling space with stimulation that leaves a hollow feeling afterward. Basic skills in handling daily needs strengthen when the reflex to outsource everything to an app gets interrupted because figuring out meals, navigation, or small fixes with what is at hand builds knowledge that makes life more resilient when services change or become unreliable. Assessing a situation directly rather than immediately searching for a digital shortcut cultivates confidence that spreads to other areas, making routines feel capable rather than dependent. These steady practices do not throw away useful aids, they simply stop the slide into total reliance on systems that can raise costs, add tracking, or alter access without warning, keeping the power closer to the individual where decisions belong. Archives of media held on personal equipment create collections that remain available under the owner's rules without outside interference or sudden unavailability. Home based storage keeps everything ready without depending on connections or policies, so the focus stays on enjoying the material itself, free from prompts or restrictions. Adding physical items for favorites builds protection against digital shifts or blocks that can remove content unexpectedly. The deep satisfaction of real ownership rather than borrowed access mirrors the larger drive to take charge of personal space and experiences, ensuring they serve the user long term. Advanced functions operating entirely on own devices keep processes private and eliminate ongoing ties to remote services that log interactions or shape results according to external rules. Local execution provides the benefits for tasks that need them while avoiding the risks of data aggregation or influence from centralized points. The pattern holds steady applying capability where it adds clear value without accepting packages that prioritize retention or data flow over personal control. Innovation gets directed towards supporting life on the user's terms rather than reshaping it around platform needs. Methods of exchange that avoid heavy layers of tracking maintain room for direct agreements based on mutual understanding rather than automated oversight that records every detail. Simple arrangements using good services or tangible items keep things straightforward and less vulnerable to sudden changes in rules or access. These options work well as backups, preserving flexibility when main systems introduce extra conditions that feel unnecessary for ordinary interactions, keeping choice alive where it matters most. Smaller private spaces for conversation and sharing allow thoughts to develop through ongoing direct involvement, building trust from repeated real participation instead of fleeting boosts in visibility. With less external reach, there is room for ideas to unfold with nuance before facing wider judgment, offering territory that faster public spaces sometimes rush past in favor of quick reactions. This setup strengthens honest exchange alongside broader discussions by giving depth a protected place to grow without constant demand for speed or agreement. Clear and pace sharing of ideas draws more notice as people tire of high intensity formats that rely on drama to hold focus because material delivered steadily honors limited attention by giving substance without requiring nonstop emotional response. Its strength comes from leaving space for actual thinking rather than pushing immediate replies, which matches how real understanding usually settles once the rush of fast content loses its pull. Voices that put content first over spectacle stand out because they feed the quiet hunger for meaning that survives, even after the surface excitement fades. The earliest online setups let users guide their own experiences with simple timelines and flexible areas that allowed sessions to start and end naturally without fighting the desire to step away. Personal pages felt like owned spaces, and updates followed chosen connections without hidden forces reshaping what appeared. That foundation supported real linkage on straightforward terms before the push for bigger scale brought in features that encouraged staying longer through easier paths and variable rewards. Today's personal adjustments work to bring back pieces of that balance by putting choice back into the moment of use rather than accepting the changed structures as the only way. Concerns about heavy influence in digital layers keep arising because abilities to watch and guide have grown together with interests from different powerful groups. Efforts sold as helpful or safe often expand what gets seen or shaped, creating slow building effects that feel out of step with normal daily life. When routine actions add more confirmation steps, the balance between ease and personal space becomes clearer. Simpler setups serve as practical ways to limit reach where full integration brings more watching than real benefit for the average person. Direct holding of content guarantees it lasts no matter how rules around access or permissions change because personal collections built over time stay whole without outside decisions stepping in. Earlier contained formats keep their original feel because they run without needing live connections or approvals from distant sources. These ways turn free time into something that gathers personal value rather than depending on continued permission to exist. Evaluating each piece of technology by how much it truly adds to independence and real usefulness separates helpful tools from those that mainly push other goals. When standard paths push tighter, daily weaving the check gets stricter to make sure the gains cover the ongoing pulls on focus and information. Arrangements managed by the user often last longer because they avoid loops tied to making money or planned updates, keeping the emphasis on serving the person rather than the provider. The steady spread of these changes slowly shifts daily patterns, so attention stays with picked activities instead of guided sequences, and energy with others goes toward real shared time, where feedback comes from lived moments. Creative work benefits from mental room that once went to keeping up digital images, letting ideas flow more from inside. The feel of ordinary days gains stability because the pace no longer bends by default to systems built outside personal direction. This direction grows from the real improvements people find when they adjust how they relate to technology, because more available thinking, steadier routines, and bonds fixed in direct presence give a depth that older setups often missed despite promising easy everything. The adjustment asks that real growth respect the limits of human time concentration and self rule instead of seeing them as resources for other purposes. Those making the shifts without fanfare show that working boundaries can bring back proportion while holding on to the good parts that still help. Another clear mark of the problem shows in the steady difference between what people say they want and how their time actually gets used when left to usual habits. Plenty voice a liking for simple personal updates, yet the numbers on involvement lean toward quick variety that gives fast changes above deeper content. Platforms saw that and strengthened the parts that kept attention longest, even when complaints came loud. The result is a place where the easiest way leads into habits that leave people less filled afterward, since the build targets basic drives without meeting needs for real linkage or insight. Adding purposeful resistance helps line up conduct with deeper wants instead of letting design paths take over. The practice of seeing regular events as possible material for later sharing creates a faint separation because some awareness stays set aside for recording instead of complete sinking into what is happening. When that eases experiences, recover their immediate truth since they exist mainly for the people there without acting as future items. Effort once used for capture and setup turns toward true involvement, and the memories that follow carry more personal meaning because they remain with those who made them. Ongoing measuring against polished pieces of other lives grows stronger when timelines show high points without the full ordinary stretches, setting a standard that quietly weakens contentment with one's own path. Lessening contact with that flow allows real value for the actual makeup of daily existence without the steady background of external peaks setting the bar. Bonds grow firmer because they can expand from joint presence rather than pressure to match unseen measures that often twist genuine meetings. The built up load on thinking from following fast changing fashions and talks leaves less room for longer reasoning or the quiet growing time that new ideas need. Slowing the flow of input lets the mind go back to its own speed for connecting concepts and growing grasp across time instead of jumping between bits. Longer substance, whether by reading or unhurried talk, reclaims its draw because focus has space to rest without new stimuli fighting for room all the time. That gained ability opens paths to things needing patience, like learning instruments, facing involved tasks, or building true skill in picked areas. Real self dependence widens through repeated small steps that cut reliance on outside fixes for common wants. Handling minor upkeep or setups directly changes the response from automatic passing off to judging what can be done with what is there. This view treats usual difficulties as chances to grow ability rather than quick bothers to hand over. Collected skills make a cushion that makes routines more steady when outside help faces shifts or stops keeping existence handleable from inside. Special local setups for holding media grow personal stores while keeping direction close. Home configurations stock good amounts of substance reachable in the personal area without outside needs for usual use. Privacy lasts because the substance stays on owned gear, and the plan allows controlled use without outside signals. Joining with physical parts for important pieces gives safety against single breakpoints, turning digital belongings into strong, self guided resources. Straight operation of complex work on personal gear lengthens the rule by giving skill without forced information sharing or payment levels. Local picks supply the advantages while enclosing dangers linked with centralized paths and pull. Careful use values technological hope without promising the whole set of joined reliances that often favor platform aims. The steady line is guiding progress toward improvement of individual life rather than fitting sequences to outside business frames. Paths for trade that limit layered watching keep room for open interactions based on shared understanding rather than automatic guard at every step. Physical or direct ways keep matters simple and restrict automatic sight to larger systems that can set limits based on growing rules. These work as wise additions, keeping selections when standard ways add conditions that go beyond the needs of usual dealings. Managed areas for talk and giving outlet context build through lasting involvement, making assurance that does not rest on short lived sight lifts. Smaller outside reach gives scope for thoughts to take shape before wider look, presenting space that quicker shared places sometimes hold back in favor of fast setup. This frame supports true growth next to broader talk by giving depth a spot to form without ongoing push for match or speed. Plain deliberate passing of thoughts wins ground as listeners grow weary of setups depending on high energy to keep interest because time substance admits limited focus by giving worth without nonstop call for answer. Its force lives in making room for taking in rather than demanding instant join, which fits better to how hold truly comes together. Once quick stimulation backs off, sayings centered on matter above show grow clear because they meet the continuing want for importance beneath the surface draw. Base online plans allowed user led joins via plain timelines and bendable spaces that okayed natural session limits without push against leaving. Personal spots ran as held lands and notices chased picked links without covered steering forming order. That setup helped linkage on clearer terms before growth targets took in parts favoring longer, stay through, made easier routes and uneven returns. Today's single person tweaks look to get back sections of that balance by putting judgment back in the middle of joining instead of giving in to the later built changes as set. Thoughts about thick rule inside digital frames stay since watching and pointing abilities have moved forward at the same time with mixed priorities from big groups. Tries shown as guarding or smoothing regularly make bigger what gets looked at or formed, making built up results that lots see as poor fit to normal partaking. When usual deeds add extra proof layers, the steadiness between ease and self hold sharpens. Basic setups act as sound checks by narrowing range, where total blend brings looking that tops fair gain. Sure, plain keeping of substance promises lasting no matter changing orders around reach, or okay, since groups echoing personal move stay full without outside calls meddling. Limited forms from past times save there meant character because they work free of lasting outside links or permissions. Such habits change chosen time into things that collect individual worth rather than needing long outside okay to stay working. Checking tech sites by their honest gift of freedom and output tells helpful ads from those mainly helping other ends. When usual ways urge closer, knit into daily cloth, the look gets tighter to make sure gains balance the steady ass on notice and facts. Self led groups usually show better hold by dodging circles bound to pay making or set swaps, holding stress on receiver gain over seller signs. The planned taking in of these ways steadily changes common moves, so notice stays aimed at chosen joins instead of signaled orders, and link strength directs toward felt joint being, where answers come from lived swap. Clever labors gain from thinking presence earlier given to holding projected looks, letting result come more from inner push. The rising trade of days keeps raised steadiness because leading beat no longer defaults to outside take groups. This way gathers from the seen betterments met when ties with technology take true change because grown thinking presence, tougher daily frames, and fixes set in quick presence give depth that past builds often lacked despite claims of easy link. The change needs that big growth honor bounds of human stretch, focus, and self lead instead of seeing them as inputs for unrelated lift. Those doing the tweaks quietly prove that working edges can set balance again while keeping good sides that last and adding well. If you have made it this far all the way through, you are part of the 1 hour gang. And I respect the hell out of that because it means you sat with some hard truths about the direction our world has taken and you did not look away or reach for the next distraction to numb it out. Most people will never make it to the end of a conversation like this because the very habits we have been talking about have trained them to bounce around and lose focus before anything real sinks in. But you stayed, and that says something important about where your head is at right now. If you're if you are enjoying these angry guy videos and they are giving you that sobering wake up call you did not know you needed, then show some real support by buying me a Red Bull using the link right there in the description because that is what keeps me going and lets me keep laying out these straight truths without pulling punches or chasing trends. It is a small thing, but it actually helps more than you might think. And it tells me the message is landing with people who are ready to hear it. Now, tell me in the comments what you thought about everything we covered here today. Do you agree that this quiet revolution of walking away from the constant surveillance, instant gratification, and centralized control is the smartest move a lot of regular people are making right now? Or do you see it differently? Maybe you have already started cutting back on certain apps or rebuilding your own offline setup, and you want to share what that has done for your headspace or your daily life. Drop your honest thoughts below because the real conversation happens when people speak straight and we all get to learn from each other without the algorithms deciding what rises to the top. Like the video if you like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.